love you. I'm glad that you are here. For those who are visiting with us on this family day, thank you for accepting our invitation and being with us today. We have 4 special days through the year. We want you to come worship with us every Sunday, but we have 4 special days. 2 where we focus on inviting family, and 2 where we focus on inviting friends. This is the first family day of the year, and we're glad that you are with us today. We want to invite you to stay and enjoy a potluck meal with us after worship, and even stay for our Bible study at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bread. Bread is one of the staples of life. Any of you here cannot eat a meal without bread? Anybody that simply cannot eat a meal without having some kind of bread? Got a few of them. You go to any culture, just about. Probably every culture. And they eat bread. Gotta have bread. Some of us obviously can't even eat anything without bread. We had a brother in Romania who was like that, had to have bread. And of course they were poor, and when we had them come over to the house, we usually ask them to bring something. You need to contribute something, not be on the receiving end of everything all the time, even if you are poor. So we would have them contribute something. Sometimes they would stop off and get a 2-liter of a drink or something, but Benoni had to bring his own bread. Because he would eat a whole loaf of bread by himself, just about one meal, and that's no exaggeration. He had to have bread. Rachel makes us bread every Saturday morning. She makes homemade biscuits every Saturday morning. Unless she's going somewhere, or unless we come to the building. And it's not the frozen biscuits now. And it's not the Walt biscuits. You know what I mean by Walt biscuits? Take them out of the fridge and you flop them on the counter to get them open. She doesn't make Walt biscuits. She makes homemade biscuits every Saturday morning. She's getting us spoiled. She went for a while cooking them on a cookie sheet. But then one Saturday morning, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, the cookie sheet was dirty. She didn't want to wash it, so she pulled out a glass casserole dish and she made the biscuits in the casserole dish. And the biscuits in the casserole dish, as far as Joel and Ann and I are concerned, are better than the biscuits on the cookie sheet. So now on Saturday mornings, if I need something to help get the girls out of bed, I say, Mama made glass biscuits this morning. That's better than the metal biscuits. They're softer. Put a little apple jelly, grape jelly on them. We don't want to eat the rest of the day. Just hang up on Mama's biscuits. John chapter 6. Jesus gives us one of those famous statements that he makes in the Gospel of John, where he says, I am the bread of life. Turn to John chapter 6. There are 4 things that Jesus makes, statements that he makes in this chapter that I see parallel bread. John chapter 6. At the beginning of John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. It's one of the few miracles that all 4 gospel writers record. One of the few. Obviously, all 4 of them talk about the resurrection, but that's one of the few miracles, one of the few incidences where all 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all write about it. And at the beginning of John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000 with, of course, 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish that a little boy came. It was his lunch. That ought to help us get in mind how little it was. It was the lunch for a little boy. 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. Now, the sermon that Jesus gives that we're going to look at here in chapter 6 comes the next day after that. And so the people that he's talking to in John chapter 6 has this miracle that he's done in the back of their mind. Feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And now he comes back to him here in John chapter 6 and he says, I want to tell you something. You've eaten this bread, you've eaten this fish, and it's filled your tummy. But I want to tell you that I am the true bread that came down from heaven. Now before we look at some of these 4 points that Jesus makes about himself being the bread from heaven, we also need to remind ourselves of another story that really happened in the Old Testament that is also in the background here. And that's the story of the manna that God sent down from heaven in Exodus chapter 16. And there's another pretty long reference to it in Numbers chapter 11. If you remember, or don't remember, I'll tell you about it. Exodus chapter 16, the Israelites have come out of Egypt, and they've left all that good food in Egypt. The good food, like our vegetarians in the audience like. Cucumbers and onions and leeks and all that stuff. They left that behind. When they're out there wandering around in the wilderness, they complain to God, and they said, we got to have something else to eat. Something different. Now some of you don't like to eat leftovers, do you? If you have any leftovers, they go in the trash. My mom used to call them Muscos. We're having Muscos tonight? She said, yes, everything in the refrigerator must go. That's what we're eating tonight. Well, the Jews in the wilderness got tired of eating the same old thing, so they said to God, we need something else. So God poured down from heaven this thing that was small and round like a coriander seed, and it was white, and it had a very light, sweet taste to it like honey. And that morning when the Israelites went out in the wilderness to gather this up, they didn't know what to call it. And so they said, manna. Manna. Okay, well, let's call it that. Americans, they'll call it manna, 2,000 years from now, but we'll call it manna. What is it? That's what they call it. And so for 40 years, while they wandered around in the wilderness, God fed the Israelites primarily with this manna, this manna. Okay, so now John chapter 6. Jesus comes along, and he has this discussion with the Jews, and he says, I want you to believe on him and whom he has sent. And the Jews said, well, what do we have to do to believe, to work the works of God? He says, you need to work the works of God. That is, you need to believe on him whom he has sent. First of all, the bread from heaven is a gift. I had Rachel wrap this little bread up here in this little bow. If you were starving to death, and I gave you this bread, it would be a gift indeed. I need it. I want it. I'm hungry. Starving to death. One of our Christians one time, it wasn't bread, it was actually a cucumber and a tomato. But he came to us so distraught because he was so hungry, he stole a cucumber and a tomato from the open market. So hungry. Bread is a gift. Now, Jesus had given the Jews the day before the gift of the food. They were hungry, and Jesus says, here, I'll give you some food. It was a gift. Look here in John chapter 6 and how Jesus talks to them about him being the gift from God. Verses 32 and 33. Jesus says to the Jews, truly I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven. Now, the Jews are going back with Jesus, back and forth. And the Jews had said, who are you? If you want us to believe that you are who you say you are, you need to give us a sign. They said, Moses gave the Israelites a sign back in the wilderness, and that's the sending of manna from heaven. They said, Moses gave us this sign from heaven. We want you to give us a sign. And so Jesus here says, you know what? It wasn't even Moses that gave you that bread. It wasn't Moses that did it. It's God. Truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. What is the true bread? Well, what is the true hunger? What is the true hunger? What does man desire? What does man need more than anything else? He needs his spirit to be strengthened. Isn't that right? He needs His Spirit to be strengthened more than anything else. That is what is most important in life. And so Jesus says, the true bread that comes out of heaven is not the manna. If you eat the manna, you're hungry. In fact, God made the Israelites, back in Exodus chapter 16, He made the Israelites go out every single day to gather that manna. Every single day. God said, do not collect more on one day than you need. Don't do it. Somebody did. There's always somebody in the audience that has to do the opposite of what they're told, right? Somebody did it anyway. And the Bible says that that pot of manna that they had collected, the extra, had worms in it the next day. God said, you don't collect more than what you need. Why? Because He wants them to trust Him, to rely on Him, not on the manna, except on Friday. On Friday, God says you can go out and collect all that you need for 2 days. Why? Because the next day would be the Sabbath, and God wanted them to dedicate the Sabbath to Him. And so on Friday, they collected 2 days' work. Then they would go back out on Sunday, on the first day of the week, and they would collect more again. And so Jesus says, I am the true bread. You eat the manna and you're going to be hungry again. But if you feed on me, not only will you never be hungry again, but as Brother Rob read earlier from verses 48 through 50, Jesus says you won't even die if you eat from me. Look at verse 33. The bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven, which gives life to the world. Now that statement was probably lost on the Jews. But it is very significant that Jesus says this true bread out of heaven, this gift from God out of heaven is for everybody. Now, if you wanted to take a bite from Rachel's bread, if everybody wanted to take a bite from Rachel's bread, we'd have to cut it in pretty small pieces. Jesus, the day before, had taken those 5 small loaves of bread, those 2 small fish, and He had multiplied them to feed 5,000 men. We don't know how many women and children were there. And then took up 12 baskets full of leftovers, muscos. Jesus can take the bread that He offers and He can distribute it to everybody. There's no end to the blessings that come out of Jesus Christ. He is the gift from God. The gift that never ends. So that's one point that we see about Jesus and bread here in John chapter 6. Second of all, we see that bread draws. Now, this morning, did you come into the building through the basement downstairs? Smell all that good food? Can you smell the food now? That's to entice you visitors to stay with us and eat after the services. Rachel cooked this bread in her bread machine. She didn't make it by hand. She cooked it in the bread machine all night long. We woke up this morning and smelled the bread. Bread draws you. The smell of something cooked. Well, in the story of Exodus chapter 16, what drew the Israelites to gather up that manna was that hunger that they had, that physical hunger. We are here this morning worshiping because we recognize that we've got that spiritual hunger, that spiritual need we have, and we're going to look for it. And we know that Jesus provides, Jesus fills that need. But how many of our family and friends and co-workers out there, they also have that need, but they're going to the wrong place to fill it? God is trying to draw them. Look back in John chapter 6, in verses 44 and 45. Look how God draws man to Him. No one can come unless the Father who sent me draws him. And I will raise him up on the last day. There's a reference to the resurrection. It is written in the prophets, they shall all be taught of God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. So you see, God says, I'm going to draw you.